everybody to this Feminist Sport Lab interview with one of our members, Dr. Anna Posbergh. We're here today because we are sharing the amazing work that our members are doing. So over the course of this year, we'll have various interviews and roundtables with our different amazing members. And this is the one that we're going to be chatting to Dr. Anna Posbergh about the work that she does, about who she is, and about the future of sport and of her research. So my name is Dr. Sheree Bekker, pronouns she, her.
I'm Stephen Mumford, pronouns he, him.
And Anna, do you want to introduce yourself briefly?
Yes, my name is Anna Posbergh. My pronouns are she, her. I am an American. I did all my post-secondary training in the US. I'm from, for those who know US geography, I'm from outside of Minneapolis, Minnesota. So up north, we get a lot of snow there. And I did my undergrad there. I was a pole vaulter at the University of Minnesota. And I finished up my undergraduate there. I studied English, math, and kinesiology because I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I really loved learning and I loved being in school. I come from a family of academics, and so school was natural, school was fun. And so then I went and did my master's at Carnegie Mellon University out in Pittsburgh. And there I studied literary and cultural studies. So I did a lot of theory for a year. But I wanted to get back to sport. I was in kind of a more traditional English field, studying very broad sort of cultural studies. But I was working with the track team out there, and I, having been an athlete, loving sports, I wanted to find a way to do theory and also sports. And that led me to the University of Maryland, where I did my PhD in kinesiology, but specializing in physical cultural studies. And at Maryland, I was really interested in the intersections of gender and sport, of course. But I actually came in, my partner is a football player, American football player, and I wanted to kind of disrupt the world that he was in because I was a bit cheeky. And so I was initially coming in wanting to study hypermasculinity in American football. And that was what I proposed to study, which is wild now to think about where I ended up.
I didn't actually know about that. I didn't
Yeah.
realize your partner was, first of all, a football player, and secondly, that it was the masculinity side of it that you wanted to study initially.
Yes,
And
yeah.
now you're working on gender like verification and eligibility. So how did you move from that to this?
I took a class my very first semester. My advisor, Dr. Shannon Jetty, was teaching a technoscience, feminist technosciences class, my very first semester. And in that, one of the weeks we had was on eligibility and kind of the boundaries of femaleness and the scientification of gender. And I was so interested in everything we were talking about. Having an English, math, and kinesiology background, I didn't think there was anything where I could pull from each one. Like, I thought I would have to choose one of those areas to specialize in. But in looking at the scientification of gender and those kind of techno-scientific processes, it was really cool to be able to pull from my training in kind of number theory, quantification, and understanding how that objective science works, but then also the theory and gender studies that I had as well, obviously based in sport, but then also looking at it from a very feminist theoretical perspective and kind of what are the ethics at play? How do we really define and understand gender? And is it fair, ethical, right to use scientific measures, specific scientific measures to determine if someone is a woman or not? And can we determine if someone is a woman or not? Does that map onto eligibility for a women's or a women's category? Because men can kind of do whatever they want. Category is that carve out category.
Yeah.
And so
yeah, sorry to interrupt you, but that is so fascinating because obviously I know you, we've done some qualitative research together. I know you as kind of this expert in qualitative research methods in many ways, that you've used many qualitative methods, but I loved how you just said that you brought your background in the more scientific, we can get onto that word later, that scientific side of it into this, that informs the way that you said you understand the policies and how they came to be and what the work is that they do.
Yeah, and I think that background in math, both my parents have PhDs in electrical engineering. They are brilliant. They are so methodical. They are, and I have come from a family of doctors, engineers, very, very post-positivist, quantitative thinking. And that's always how I grew up, was incredibly analytical, incredibly black or white. Like I was doing proofs when I was like 18 years old for math. Like I came home one day over winter break when I was like 18 or 19 years old, and my dad had literally like a multivariable calculus exam for me to work on over winter break. Yeah, I came from an incredibly quantitative upbringing.
Well,
And
can
so,
I dive in a bit deeper
yeah,
here?
Sure.
The way you stated it, like a kind of, what was the term? Scientification of
yeah,
gender?
Great
yeah,
word.
Yeah.
Great word.
So are you suggesting then that we shouldn't treat gender as a purely scientific matter? Is there other approaches that you think have to come in? Is it something that science on its own can't understand? Do we need to bring in social science, humanities to understand these questions?
yeah. I think inherently that question, like my gut says no, but at the same time, I think there's a slight adjustment I would make in the premise of your statement of assuming that there is a separation between those kinds of laboratory sciences and social sciences. They're never separate. We can't just bring in social sciences because they're always there. That is always inherently
Yes.
part of the scientific process that we do. It's not something like, okay, we did the mathy stuff. Now we're gonna bring in like the sociologists to determine what questions you wanted to do, to determine what metrics you're going to study, what your threshold is, who you're going to study, how you're going to solicit them. Those are political questions that are asked in the
Yeah.
scientific process. And so there's no point in which I think science is ever objective. You can obviously arrive at an answer, and and this isn't to say, of course, that when you make these political decisions, your science is bad. You can do bad science, but making those decisions isn't inherently going to lead to bad science. It's just going to lead to a particular outcome, an answer based on the steps you made along the way. And I think that's just a part of the puzzle. That's a part of the piece. And it's important to look at different trainings, different perspectives, to ask different questions, to work with different populations, to consider the multiplicity of lived experience of how bodies are made. And so I think that science is such a broad term. And so I guess like yes, but also no to your question. But the no isn't that we should ignore social sciences, is that they're always there, whether they're ignored or not.
Well, I totally get that, but I mean, it sounds like you would suggest then that it would be a mistake to, if there are people who think that like this is a purely scientific objective question, and I agree with that completely, because even the decision what to investigate scientifically, science itself can't tell you what to investigate. That has to be our choice.
And I think that's what Anna's saying in terms of that, like that's inherently built into that like process of like even deciding research questions.
And I think like
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, please.
You go ahead.
So like one example, we obviously talk a lot about trans and non-binary inclusion. Sheree and I actually have a special issue coming out in the Sociological Report Journal this December, and also next either June or September, TBD. And obviously that, I think when we think about questions of science and gender, is where we, especially whenever I talk to someone on the street, I'm like, oh, I study gender and sport. And they're like, oh, what do you think about the trans issue? And so I think we naturally gravitate towards that. But I think I always pitch my research as studying the politics of science, because this is a big area of it. But this appears in a lot of other topics too. So, for example, two areas that I'm working on right now. One is when birth control was a banned substance from 1988 to 1989. So quite recently, actually. And
Fascinating.
the Olympic Committee put it on there because of scientific reasons. Norethindrone is a type of androgen, and it can be used as a masking agent with testosterone. And so because oral contraceptives typically have that compound in there, it was flagged as a doping mechanism. And also within that, is it ethical? Like women who don't menstruate or have regular cycles was considered a form of cheating also, because you are manipulating your body into not doing its natural cycle. all of these are inherently misogynistic, sexist, white, colonial ideas around what bodies are. But it was pitched as, like, if you look at it on paper, norethindrone is a masking agent. Norethindrone is in oral contraceptives. Therefore, oral contraceptives may be used as a masking agent for testosterone, any kind of other androgens. And so it was on the banned substance list for a bit because of that scientific logic. And you can pitch it as objective, but the problem was when they kept it on there, the US Olympic Paralympic Committee and the Canadian National Olympic Committee were going to lose 85 to 90% of their women athletes in the upcoming Calgary Games in 1988. And they also pointed to other scientific evidence that said, actually, this is not doping. Giving women bodily autonomy is not an unfair advantage, actually. And what you're doing, you cannot just base it on the science that you happen to have. There's ethical, pharmacological, financial, fill in the blank, ical issues what you're doing. And so eventually they did retract it. And so I think
that connects for me. Yeah, that connects me so much to the conversations right now around menstrual cycles and this whole like control of women's bodies being like this idea that fertility is the most interesting and important thing about her. And it's really interesting how birth control was like this thing that was banned as like, oh, she's clearly not going through her natural cycle, as you said. So she's not, it feels to me those same themes like, oh, she's not kind of woman enough because she's artificially adjusting this. It's, oh, that's so interesting to me.
And like, it's just so annoying to me too. And I guess like just to like, maybe this is unprofessional, but it's just annoying to me. Like people are so obsessed with women's genitals and their womb. And I'm like, that's just gross. Like, let's not talk about any, we don't need to talk about that. But like that sometimes is, I was reading one of our CJ Jones, who I think is absolutely brilliant. They had a piece that will be part of our December issue. And they talk about the gender critical feminist movement and this comment from who was it? The tennis player,
Navratilova.
Navratilova. And in her comments, I can never say her name.
Martina.
Martina's comment, she talks about how she doesn't have an issue with trans people on the street, but like, how can someone, go compete in this category and then come back and have babies or something like that?
Oh, yes, I saw that.
Yeah, of fertility being the determinative of whether you're a woman or not. What about women who can't have children? What about women who choose not to have children? That doesn't make them any less of a woman, but that's your flavor of the day for what defines a woman. Next day it'll be testosterone. Next day it'll be chromosomes. There's so many elements to it, and they are all political decisions on what you think is the determinative of woman. But we can also fill in fairness. We can fill in doping. We can fill in whatever category you want. Every one of these scientific decisions is political at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's right. And we've seen those kind of cycle through each of those different ones, and it seems to be going back to chromosomes again now, which is so interesting because we did have that conversation years ago. I want to circle back a little bit and then we can move forward. I know, because I think I interrupted you and we got onto this amazing conversation, which I'm really happy to continue. But I think we had just started to say you went to study kinesiology, and I'm curious as to how you got from there to, you thought you were going to do masculinity, and then you ended up doing this work around, gender. I also never know which words to use. There's so many different phrases. So how would you describe then the work that you did in your PhD and where you're at now?
Yeah, so in that class that I took that first semester, one of the pieces we read was the Out of Bounds piece by Katrina Karkazis, Rebecca Jordan-Young, Sylvia Camporesi, and Georgianne Davis. And I, being 23 years old with no shame, emailed Katrina Karkazis actually to commend her on this great paper that I really enjoyed. I thought it was fantastic. And would she be willing to chat, hop on Zoom or just connect sometime. And I wish I still had that kind of courage. And I wish that other people also did. Cause like,
Same.
what a life-changing, professionally and personally changing experience, because she was so kind in her response. And she helped me work on the blog post that actually connected you and me, that I
Yes,
wrote on the recent hyperandrogenism policies for then the IAAF.
that's
I got to
right.
meet her in New York as well later on, and she was on my dissertation committee. But those conversations with her were so important in kind of, I quickly realized I didn't really want to write about men. Men got enough attention. I wanted to write about women, and I wanted to find a way to bring together all these different things that I was interested in, and the way that I think also. I think a lot of qualitative researchers, I wish I could just be really creative. And I was talking to my colleague, Dr. Deborah Waldman, the other day, who is absolutely brilliant. She does some great work. Yeah. But we were talking about different approaches to writing. And she's like, a lot of times I think about it as a story, and like you kind of get into the writing and your thoughts come about as you write. And I was like, I can't do that. I have my prescribed categories that I fill in. And I have the same, every piece that I write is the same outline. I was like, I cannot think about it any other way. Like, and I was like, I think that's my very methodical way of writing. I can't imagine a different way besides the process that I do every time. And so I wanted to be able to honor that way of thinking, because it's part of who I am. But I also wanted to kind of find a way to bridge all of them together. And so I arrived at this scientification of gender. And I was interested in women with high testosterone, or intersex women, women with differences of sexual development. Dr. Katrina Karkazis encouraged me to look at trans women, because at the time there weren't very many discussions on it. But Katrina, being the brilliant human being she is, in 2017, like, I think this is going to be really big in about 3 or 4 years.
Oh, God.
Wow.
Yeah, she called it. She called her.
Yeah, she knew.
She called it. And so I included that I was interested in that category too. And then at the time, Mary Kane came out with her struggles with relative energy deficiency in sport. And I was really, at the time when Mary Kane's story broke, I had been kind of looking at eligibility policies, women with high testosterone, trans women, and there were so many people who were very like, oh, that's just the way sport works. It's just not fair. We have to worry about safety. Like, and we're very exclusionary in their approaches. And then these same women, when Mary Kane's story broke, said, well, sport, we need to protect these women. This isn't fair to treat women like this.
So true.
Women have the right to participate. Like, how could we do this? The very same people were utilizing these discourses of protection, safety, and fairness in ways that fit their kind of political beliefs and fit what they thought a woman should be. And so I became really interested in this idea of protection. That's what my dissertation was focused on, and how these discourses of protection in protective
Brilliant
policy.
dissertation, by the way. We'll link it below. I think that's what people say. We'll link it below.
Yeah, so I coined this phrase protective policies to span the different types of policies that look to defend fairness in women's sports, safeguard women's health, and then also police that boundary, the social and medical boundary of who counts as a woman. And looking at how science is often mobilized in very strategic ways to achieve those political ends. For an organization knows what they want at the end, and they're going to find science or interpret science to achieve those ends. And they're going to pitch it as, we looked at the science and here's what it said. But you also left out, the context, the fact that it wasn't conducted with athletes, the fact that you were looking at bone mineral density and not performative advantage. Signposting a paper that we hopefully will up soon as well.
The discourse of protection is something we've been thinking about, because we recently read Mary Wollstonecraft, A Vindication of the Rights of Woman. So that's from 1792. And we're hoping there's going to be another video on that.
Yeah, we'll do a book club video on that one.
And in 1792, Mary Wollstonecraft already called it.
Yeah.
She spoke about, the phrase she used was the insolent condescension of protectorship.
Wow.
And she realized that's what was going on, that girls were kept from physical education for their own protection, so that they weren't allowed to be active. And she also saw how this was harming women, how it was determining women's physicality, determining the physical development. And so I suspect the discourse has always been around. It's always been used as a way of, well, I would say harming women, but presenting it as if it's for their benefit.
Yeah, and I think that word protection too, so when I did like REDS research for a little bit in my postdoc, and I had a really brilliant person, confidentiality, but a really brilliant person who I interviewed who did a lot of work on female athlete health and kind of inclusion of women and increasing the representation and diversity in elite sport medicine groups. And when I brought up the idea of protection in kind of a gender capacity, they said that word protection, it has such patriarchal undertones to it, because who are you actually protecting? Are you protecting the person, or are you protecting an idea at the end of it? And that term protection, we hear it from fathers. We hear it from fathers. We hear it from spouses who identify as male. We hear it typically from, you hear it when you hear about women in abusive relationships. Oh, well, he was just, protective. We hear that term, not to like take it to another level, but like,
no, but you also hear it from presidents, who are like, oh, I can protect his country.
Way of life.
Yeah.
And I had another wonderful reviewer for a paper that came out a little bit ago also bring up the same point about protection, and that, is it worth diving into kind of the patriarchal undertones when we think about protection, where that term comes from and how it is often used and the ideas we have with it? Does it actually reinforce the binaries that you're trying to trouble?
Yeah, because what it rapidly becomes is when you get self-appointed police officers of gender. So people who decide it's their job to police the gender norms, and say Iman Khalif or whoever it might be is not a woman because she doesn't meet these gender standards that I don't know where they've come from. I don't know who's said that it's their job to police that, but yeah, that seems to be like the next step that comes out of protection.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's such an interesting term, and I think like the way I try to use it is not to reinforce those patriarchal ideals, but to kind of bring them to the fore, and that the way protection has been mobilized in sport has been to reinforce the structures that keep out women, initially women writ large, but then, women of upper class were allowed in, white women were allowed in. It's a very kind of mediated acceptance of particular women now. And so you're still protecting that space in a particular type of way. And I think, who am I trying to think of? I want to say Anna Baith, either Maddie Pape, Anna Baith, one of them has written about how in these spaces, when white women were given access to it, you work so hard to get access. Oh, Holly Thorpe has talked about it. You get access to those spaces. And once you get access to those spaces, the idea of giving some of it away as if it's a finite amount of space, you've worked so hard. It's a very particular type of feminism that is a protective feminism, I believe is how Holly has talked about it.
Oh my gosh, so true. And I think that's exactly what we see, because we do hear from cis women particularly that they are really worried about this space that they've kind of carved out for themselves and fought for in sport. Then are really worried that they're going to somehow lose that by bringing other people in. And I agree with you. It's not about sharing a finite kind of if I can use an economics term.
Small pie.
But like, it's about making that circle bigger and including more people. But I can see how people are afraid of that. And I think that is a huge thing that we have to reckon with and work through. Yeah.
And the way I've always thought about it is like, we're thinking about, the glass being half full or half empty. Well, the glass is actually refillable.
Yeah.
So why is
we can make our own glass. We can just get a bigger one.
I have a Brita, like you can borrow it if you want. We can refill our glass, no problem.
So Anna, what are you working on now? What is your work involved now, and yeah, what are you excited about at the moment?
So I have that birth control project that I was in the IOC archives this past summer collecting a lot of data on that, I was surprised at how much I got, because every time I tell someone about like birth control was a banned substance, everyone, including like one of my good friends, John Gleaves at Cal State Fullerton, who's like the doping expert, did not know that this was on there. So that was, I guess, validating that I found something interesting. So I'm working on that right now, how that came to be, why it came to be, and how it was also erased effectively from doping history. And the spoiler alert is they used incredibly scientific language, so people didn't actually know what they were doing.
So same
Inaccessible medical
patterns,
language. Yep.
different substance or different kind of thing, but same patterns.
So I've got a question. So I hope it's not too big, but I just wonder what you think the future holds for sport then. And, you know, are you optimistic about the future, or is there a particular direction you'd like things to go in?
There is a particular direction I'd like things to go in. I don't know if it will happen, but I think I would just like people to stop obsessing over the wrong things when it comes to gender. Like, it is important to recognize women as a broad category have unique lived experiences. They have unique bodies and medical needs. And we should be looking to support them, breaking down taboo topics, like talking about menstruation. That is so taboo, and it shouldn't be. It is part of probably about half of the people who exist on this planet go through a menstrual cycle. We should be talking about that. We shouldn't be talking about an athlete who looks like a man and who knows what she's doing and like misgendering it. Like, that doesn't matter. What matters, if you actually want to help and support athletes, talking to them what their needs are, how to help them balance performing at a high level and being healthy, because elite sport is not sustainable right now. And even as we trickle down, other aspects of sport are not sustainable. They can be so harmful, so damaging. They reinforce gender, racial, colonial stereotypes. And we should be talking about that rather than what a main testosterone levels are, because nobody really cares. In my opinion.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Oh my gosh, I'm so with you on that message. I think that really, like, the real problems in women's sport, and alongside that, to go all the way back full circle to where you had initially started, we've also had many conversations, I think, about like masculinity in sport, and like how sport is not a great place for men and people who identify as men either. Like, it's just not a good place for anybody, and we can build safer sports spaces that are more welcoming for everyone. Yeah,
feminist sport benefits everybody, because like one of the arguments for sex, I used to give a lecture in Maryland's philosophy department on like the ethics of sport, sex segregation. And one of the arguments was, well, men's sports and women's sports have intrinsically different values that they bring to it. You know, men's sports are aggressive, they're exciting, they're violent. Women's sports are more caring, you know, compassionate, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, why can't sport just have the good parts? Like, why do we need to like segregate them based on like the values that they bring? And also, toxic masculinity really hurts men. American football, you get concussed, you're expected to just come back up. Like, you're a sissy if you don't. Well, I don't know, if you're seeing 6 umpires when there's only 1 there, that kind of sounds like a problem.
That also again relates to Mary Wollstonecraft in 1792. I mean,
Stephen's been reading about Mary this week again.
Love it.
Yeah, I've been refreshing, but yeah, she thinks it's ridiculous that there's one set of virtues for women and a different set of virtues for men. She thinks if something's good, it's good no matter what your gender.
Absolutely. And I think like that's what's so understated and like forgotten, in that, of course, toxic masculinity hurts women physically, mentally, emotionally, future-wise. Of course it does. It also hurts men in terms of men have typically 10 years lower life expectancy than women. I used to teach a public health class. Men have a lower life expectancy. They don't go to the doctor because it's seen as weak. They don't take medication because it's also seen as weak. They push through injuries when they shouldn't. They don't sleep. They don't eat well. They do all these behaviors and engage in these practices that are terrible for their body in the name of being a man.
Yeah, and I think that that's totally right. But I would also add that I do think it affects some men's participation in sport as well, because certainly when I was growing up in quite a working class area of northern England, sport was itself quite a toxic masculine space. And I think it's something that put me off from getting more involved in
Absolutely.
sport.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And
it's a certain kind of man. You have to live up to that
Yeah.
ideal of who that is.
heterosexual man, of course.
Yes, heterosexual. That's right. That's right. So
I
yeah,
have
I
my
think that
flag up
what's
here.
really what's really great, I think, about, you know, Anna, our collaboration, me and you, I think we've done some amazing work together that I'm so proud of. And I think it's because you in particular are able to hold these complex, nuanced things together at the same time, and to say we can care about this and this. It doesn't have to be a this or that. We can care about all of it, which is just so amazing. So to end off, I just want to ask you a little bit about looking ahead. So you've joined us at the Feminist Sport Lab. You're actually our first member because you're just like, yeah, the best kind of person. So I was wondering, what excites you about the Feminist Sport Lab, or being involved in the Feminist Sport Lab, and the work that we're all doing together with
I
it?
think one of the first things you told me, Sheree, I don't know if you remember this, but one of the first things you ever told me when we met, I may have co-opted it slightly over the years, but the base of it was collaboration and connection over competition always. And that has become every person, every amazing person I get to mentor or work with, that is the first thing I say. I always say this is a relationship built on collaboration over competition always. And that has really, really changed the way I view relationships, partnerships, collaborations. And to me, FSL made so much sense when I heard both of you were starting it, because it completely embodied that ethos. And I think there's so much strength in building those solidarities. Audre Lorde talks about how I see your wars, I see my wars, and I can see my wars in your wars, and that's what brings us together and makes us stronger. Michelle Alexander writes about it in the new Jim Crow, about the importance of building solidarities against folks who are fighting against oppression. And I see FSL as an incredibly meaningful international consortium of people who share these values and are able to find each other, because that's the hardest part sometimes. You feel so. And FSL is a way to bring together these people who care so much about the same things and want to make the world a better, more just, equitable place. And they just need to find other people like that. And so that's what excites me the most, is being able to really, I think, embrace and live out that collaboration and connection over competition ethos in this. And so
That's
so
amazing.
grateful.
Look,
Beautiful.
it's beautiful, and we can't end on any better note than that. So thank you for that generous appraisal of what we're trying to do. Yeah, it helps us understand what it's all about, doesn't it? So yeah, I think that's a great point on which to leave it. So thank you so much.
You are wonderful, and we're so excited to work with you. And yeah, I'm excited for what your future holds as well.
Thank you. I am so excited to continue working together and learning together as well. This is